But I'm going to start right ahead with the ranking. This is ranking every book that I read in the past month from best to worst, and I'll also talk about a few books that I'm currently reading and a few books that I might want to read this month as well. The best book I read this month was The Peoples of Middle-earth by J.R.R. Tolkien, the final volume in the history of Middle-earth. I found this one to be one of the most fascinating volumes out of the history of Middle-earth, although I still think The Lays of Beleriand is my favorite volume. And I did talk about this book and the entire history of Middle-earth series way more in depth in my review of the series, so check that out if you want my full thoughts on the series. But to keep it short, this was an amazing book. I especially found The New Shadow to be very fascinating, which The New Shadow is Tolkien's unfinished sequel to The Lord of the Rings that took place in the Fourth Age, and he abandoned it about 20 pages into it, but those 20 pages are really fascinating. Although I can definitely see why Tolkien never finished it. And it doesn't really, the interesting thing is it doesn't really feel like something Tolkien would write. It's very much not his writing style. It felt sort of like something that Edgar Allan Poe would write, which I love Edgar Allan Poe. But I also love Tolkien. And this whole book I absolutely loved, and I'm giving this one 10 out of 10. My journey through the history of Middle-earth was amazing. It was tiresome and dull at times, but I'm so glad I prospered through to the very end because this series was so amazing and I enjoyed every bit of it and I really learned a lot from it. And the next book is a book that I've tried to read several times, and each time I got maybe halfway through and then gave up, but this time I finally read the whole thing and I am so glad I did, and it is The Iliad by Homer. Now this is Homer's really, really long epic poem, which is sort of a fictionalized account of the Battle of Troy, of the battle between the Trojans and the Achaeans, which I believe the Achaeans are the Greeks. And, you know, it's unknown. I think it's unknown whether or not the Trojan War actually happened. So there might be, like, some historical stuff in this book, but for the most part it's fiction. There's a lot of, like, Greek mythology in it as well. The Greek gods play a huge part in it, but I loved this so much. When I read not the Iliad, I already read the Iliad. When I read the Odyssey, I want to do a video review where I talk about both the Iliad and the Odyssey because I loved this book, and I especially loved this translation. Now, the two translations I tried before, I don't think they were like the right translations for me, and that might have been part of the reason why I never actually finished them, but this is the Robert Fagles translation. And out of the two translations that I've read so far, the Robert Fagles one is definitely the best. It was just so amazing. It did go on for a while. Like, this book is very slow-paced at times. There will be, like, hundreds and hundreds of lines just describing someone's armor or their weapons or something. And it was very repetitive as well. And I know that is, like, the entire point of Greek mythology or Greek poems is that it is very repetitive. It felt like the same things were happening over and over again, just people fighting each other for pages and pages. But I really, really loved it. And I think there's so much that we can learn from this book as well when we look at Achilles and Hector and King Priam. There's just so much you can learn from this book. I especially enjoyed the last 5 or 6 chapters of it. I think those are probably the best chapters in this entire book. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed the Iliad, and I loved it so much. I especially loved the ending when King Priam of Troy confronts Achilles. That whole scene was amazing when Achilles starts to understand moral deviation, and just everything in this book is so, so good. And this is a really old book, too. It was written before parts of the Bible, and it's so good. It's really amazing how it has stood the test of time, that it was written more than 2,000 years ago, and yet we can still read it now. That's just amazing. And yeah, I love this. It was a very kind of hard to get through at times, but it was so, so worth it, and I loved it. I'm giving it 10 out of 10 as well. And the next one, this one is actually a short story, and I didn't actually read it. I listened to the audiobook, so let me pull it up right here. Where is it? It is The Crystal Egg by H.G. Wells. Now, I love all of H.G. Wells' books. I certainly haven't read all of them. I've read The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, The First Man in the Moon, The War of the Worlds, and a handful of his short stories. And I absolutely love H.G. Wells, although some of his books are better than others. Like The War of the Worlds was really good, although the ending was not great at all. The Time Machine, either The Time Machine or The First Men in the Moon is probably my favorite of his works, and I don't enjoy his short stories as much. His short stories are still great, but I just find his novels to be a lot better. But I read The Crystal Egg, and this has to be my favorite short story of H.G. Wells's. I found this one to be so fascinating. It gave me a lot of inspiration for the fantasy series that I'm working on writing about right now, in the fantasy world that I'm working on. It gave me a lot of inspiration for that, and it was so fascinating. Although I will say, it left the reader with a lot of unanswered questions at the end, and it feels almost incomplete, and I wish it were a novel, because it feels like it's sort of a novel that's been really condensed into a short story, and that's only partially written. It didn't feel completed. So I wish The Crystal Egg had been a full novel instead of a short story. It felt very condensed, and that it had actually given us more of an explanation at the end, because there's just still so many unanswered questions I have. And that's the thing with H.G. Wells, is sometimes he gives you these fascinating things to think about, these fascinating mysteries, but then he leaves them unsolved at the end of the book. Kind of like The Time Machine, he did that as well, which I loved it. But like with this story, I just wish it had been a novel, and I wish it had been expanded upon more. It feels very incomplete and almost unfinished, but still an amazing short story that I loved, and probably my favorite short story of H.G. Wells's that I've read so far. I'm giving this one 9 out of 10. The next one is actually a reread, and it is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Or this one says Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The actual title is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know why they had to change it to Sorcerer's Stone for the American edition. That just drives me crazy for some reason. But I love this. I will say that out of the Harry Potter series, this is probably the weakest book in the whole series, but it's still such a great book. It does an amazing job of setting things up, and the foreshadowing in Harry Potter is so good. There's things foreshadowed in this book, or just slightly hinted at, that are so major in later books. And I just love the way J.K. Rowling writes. Obviously, Harry Potter is one of my favorite series of all time, and I love it so much. It was one of the series that first introduced me to reading, and I love this whole series. I'm giving this one 9 out of 10 as well. An amazing book, but probably the weakest book in the series, because sometimes it's a bit too fast-paced and things are sort of going by too quickly for you to understand what's actually going on. And I feel like there are just certain things with the plot that could have been done better, but other than that, this is still an amazing book, and I love the whole Harry Potter series. The next one is more of a poem. It is by, or it's kind of a poem and a picture book, sort of like Dr. Seuss. It is by Shel Silverstein, who is an amazing poet, and it is The Giving Tree. Ooh, I almost dropped that. And I have to hold this up because I don't actually own the physical book. I love all of Shel Silverstein's poetry, his poetry collections like Falling Up and Where the Sidewalk Ends. I find his poems to be so great. They're really fun to read. And The Giving Tree is such an interesting story. It still has me kind of confused. Like, I'm still kind of confused as to what the actual message of the story was. But I just find this to be so fascinating, how Shel Silverstein can say so much with so few words. I really love The Giving Tree, as with all of Shel Silverstein's poetry. This is one of his poems that's a lot more serious. Like, a lot of his poems are just fun, whimsical, funny, and delightful. But this one is a bit more serious, and it feels sort of melancholy as well. I really loved it, and I'm giving it 9 out of 10. Next up is The Sign of the Four by Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, this whole thing isn't The Sign of the Four. The Sign of the Four is only about like 100 pages. This is the complete Sherlock Holmes Volume 1, so this has 3 of the novels and 24 of the short stories. And I really love Sherlock Holmes. I absolutely love it so much. I love A Study in Scarlet. I love the short stories. But The Sign of the Four, I have to say, is probably my least favorite Sherlock Holmes story, or at least my least favorite Sherlock Holmes novels so far. I just feel like the whole case was a bit boring, and I didn't really care about it that much, which is saying a lot, because with all the other mystery Sherlock Holmes, I'm so intrigued. But with this one, there wasn't a whole lot of mystery to it, and it didn't really make me want to read more. It wasn't very intriguing, and not a very well set up mystery in my opinion. But it is fascinating how we got to see Watson's backstory of how he first met his future wife. That's probably the greatest part of this book. Other than that, I just didn't really like The Sign of the Four as much as the other Sherlock Holmes stories, but it was still a very enjoyable novel to read, and I'm giving it 8.5 out of 10. And then we have Who Was J.R.R. Tolkien? Now this is just a fun and short book. It's much more written for younger children. It's about 100 pages long, about the life of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I've read like much more in-depth biographies about him, but I really love the simplistic style of this, and I really recommend it to you if you're wanting to know just a bit more about Tolkien, but it does just show you the surface level details of his life, and doesn't really go very in-depth, which I do prefer when books go really in-depth about something, but I really appreciate the simplistic style of this, and it's very easy to understand, but it's much more written for younger children, I think. And I'm giving this 8.5 out of 10. The next one is actually here. Here it is. The next one is On Writing by Stephen King. Now, prior to this, I didn't really have much interest in reading Stephen King's books. I've heard that he writes primarily horror, and a lot of his stories just sound really dark, and I wasn't really interested in reading Stephen King. But then I saw this at the library, and I figured, why not get it, since I'm an aspiring writer myself. And I have to say, this book ended up being a lot better than I thought it would be. The first 100 pages of it was just a biography about Stephen King's life, which I didn't really care for that much, but then the rest of it is actually writing advice. And I just find Stephen King's writing advice to be so good. He is very blunt and to the point, almost brutally to the point at times, but I really appreciate that. He's so blunt and to the point in his writing advice that I really love it. I think he has incredible writing advice on just everything, especially with prose. I'm currently working on editing a novella I wrote that's called The Worst of Times. Hopefully I'll have it published before the end of the year. But already I've included some of the writing advice that he had in this book, and I've applied it to my novella, The Worst of Times, and I feel like it's just made the story so much better. So Stephen King's writing advice is really good, and it almost does make me want to read his other novels, although I've heard there's a lot of questionable things in his books, but the guy has written 50 gazillion books. So if there are any clean Stephen King books out there, please recommend them to me, because I am interested in reading Stephen King's works right now, just not his really dark horror novels, and he writes primarily horror. So if there's anything else that he's written that's actually clean, please let me know. Next one is technically not a novel, or it's not a novel, but it is a book, and it is Dracula's Guest and Other Stories. Now this is a collection of short stories by Bram Stoker, who was the author of Dracula, and I know that the idea of Dracula and vampires has been really corrupted by pop culture, but I highly recommend you read the original 1897 classic novel, Dracula. It is so good. There are so many deep Christian themes, but please read the original Dracula, because pop culture has really ruined the idea of vampires and Dracula, and same thing with Frankenstein. The original meaning of Dracula and Count Dracula and vampires has been completely lost because it's been ruined by pop culture. And I highly recommend you read the original classic Dracula, published in 1897. And I read these short stories, and I really liked a lot of them. Dracula's Guest was really interesting, and another one I really liked was The Judge's House. But overall, I didn't really like these short stories as much as the actual novel, Dracula. And I think that Bram Stoker is a much better writer of novels than short stories, in my opinion. There were some short stories that I just failed to be really interested in. For example, The Squaw. I wasn't really interested in that story at all. And then the Burial of the Rats. I didn't really like that one as much either. The thing with Bram Stoker's short stories is that I just didn't really care about the stories or about the characters that much, which is the complete opposite of Dracula. And I don't think Bram Stoker writes very good, hooking short stories. I think he's a much better writer of novels. But still, these short stories weren't bad. I still moderately enjoyed them, so I'm giving them 8 out of 10. Next up is A Flood of Evidence by Ken Ham and Bodie Hodge. 40 Reasons Why Noah and the Ark Still Matter. So this book delves a lot into the flood that occurred about 5,000 years ago, about the flood and Noah's Ark, and it addresses all of the issues and questions that people commonly have with the Ark. For example, what was the actual size of Noah's Ark? How did he fit all the animals in there? And it is very clear explanations. It also dives a lot into Darwinian evolution and the idea that we somehow evolved from apes over millions of years. And it addresses all that stuff with dinosaur bones and how scientists believe that they're millions of years old. And it delves into why we think that and why it's actually wrong. It is such clear, logical thinking that I think everyone should read this book, especially if you're a believer in the Darwinian evolution theory. I really think you should read this book because there are so many ridiculous flaws and holes in Darwin's whole theory of evolution. But this was a great book, although I feel like it was a bit too short. It didn't really go into as much detail as I had hoped it would, and each of the chapters were only about 10 pages long each, so I wish it had gone into a bit more detail, but overall, still a really amazing book, and I'm giving it 8 out of 10. With the next book, I don't actually have a physical copy because I listened to the audiobook, but it is Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne, or this cover says Journey to the Interior of the Earth. I guess there's sort of there's several titles on it depending on which translation you use. So Journey to the Center of the Earth, Journey to the Interior of the Earth, whatever. This book I found absolutely fascinating. I've read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea twice, and I really love that book, but I hadn't read any of Jules Verne's books besides 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea prior to reading this one. And I'm really interested in reading more Jules Verne after reading this, because this was a really, really fascinating book that brought up a lot of good questions. It was a gripping story that managed to keep you reading, and Jules Verne writes such vivid descriptions that plant such a clear image in your mind of what is going on, which I really loved, and I actually absolutely love the characters in this book as well. The one complaint that I have with this book is about the character of Hans. He's just sort of there throughout the entire book, and he doesn't even feel like a character. He's just kind of a thing that sort of helps every now and then, and he didn't really have much to do with the actual plot. He was a very forgettable character with no personality at all, and I really wish that we could have learned more about the character of Hans. But still a very enjoyable and fascinating read, and I'm giving it 8 out of 10 as well. Next book is one I had to read for school, and it is Defeating Darwinism by Philip E. Johnson. Sort of similar to Flood of Evidence, which was about Noah's Ark. And while A Flood of Evidence talked a lot more about the physical and actual scientific evidence that either proves or disproves Darwinian evolution, this book delves much more into the logic behind it. And the logic behind Darwin's theories is even more flawed than the actual evidence itself, because there's so many holes in the logic, so many logical fallacies, and this was a really fascinating read, although again, as with A Flood of Evidence, I feel like it just didn't really go into enough detail. But I still really liked this. It was a fascinating read, and I had a lot of fun discussing it with my classmates at co-op. This was a very fun read and very fascinating as well, and I recommend it. I'm giving it 8 out of 10 as well. I don't have physical copies of the next 2 books because I had to return them to the library, but the next book is... here it is. What do we know about the Chupacabra? Now, if you're unfamiliar, the Chupacabra is another cryptid. A cryptid is a creature that we don't know if it exists or not, but some people have claimed to see it. Like Bigfoot is a cryptid. The giant squid was once a cryptid. Same with Komodo dragons. They were once cryptids, but then scientists found out that they were actually real creatures. And the Chupacabra is this cryptid that is sort of like a giant cat that people say, that farmers say comes into their yards by night and sucks all the blood out of their animals. And there is quite a bit of evidence for the existence of the Chupacabra, but this book also delves into the logic behind it and why it is not very likely possible that the Chupacabra exists. And this book was fascinating. I like to read about cryptids, even though I don't believe in many of them. Like Bigfoot, I feel like there's a more likely chance that Bigfoot exists than the Chupacabra. There's no way the Chupacabra exists. This was a fascinating read. I'm giving it 7.5 out of 10. I really enjoy reading about cryptids, and it gave me a lot of inspiration for my fantasy world as well. And the next one is a book sort of similar, which is What do we know about the Loch Ness Monster? And I think there's a lot more evidence for the Loch Ness Monster than the Chupacabra, but still, I'm not sure if it exists or not. It's like, with all of these cryptids, there's no definitive answer, yes or no. We don't actually know if they exist or not, and we shouldn't be too quick to disprove their existence without having actually done any research on it. Like, many people say that Bigfoot is real when they haven't done much research in it. And I think it's important to do your research and come to your own conclusions instead of making up all these assumptions. Like, I don't think it's likely the Loch Ness Monster exists, but there's still a possibility, however small. And it's the same thing with Bigfoot. Again, another fascinating read, and I enjoyed it. 7 out of 10. Next book is actually The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Now, this book ended up being a lot different than I expected. I always go into books with no expectations if I can. I try to go into them completely blind, knowing nothing about them. And yeah, I had heard a lot about this book, so I had sort of preconceived notions about it. And this book really surprised me in that it wasn't anything at all like how I expected. It's essentially about a bunch of boys, and their plane crashes and they get left alone on the island because everyone else died in the plane crash. And so this whole group of boys, 20 or more, are just left alone to their own devices on the island. And things slowly descend into madness. This book was a really interesting and it was a very gripping read. But however, it wasn't very memorable. Like, when I finished it, I didn't really think a whole lot about it afterwards. And I like books that actually make you think about them afterwards, like with books like Frankenstein and Dracula and The Time Machine. Those books are really great when you first read them, but they really just make you think about them more and more whenever you're not reading them. But this book wasn't very memorable for me, and it wasn't a very happy book either. Like, it's not like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer where it's just happy-go-lucky children playing. This is not a very happy book at all. Basically, no good things happened. It started off pretty bad and then just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Like, nothing happy happened at all in this story. I still did moderately enjoy it, but this just wasn't a very memorable read for me. It didn't make me think a whole lot, and I haven't actually really thought about it since I finished it. And I'm giving this one probably 6.5 out of 10. Still overall enjoyable, just I didn't really like it that much. I think that it had potential to be a better book, but for some reason I just didn't find myself enjoying it as much. I feel like the prose and the dialogue was just too simplistic for me. It was just very simplistic. It didn't feel like the author actually put a whole lot of thought into the prose and dialogue. You can tell he put a lot of thought into the story. The story itself was a pretty good story. It was very gripping. Managed to keep you reading. But again, just once I finished it, that was just it. Like, I'd finished it, and I was just like, whatever. So overall, an enjoyable book, but not the greatest. I'm giving it probably 6.5 out of 10. Next book is A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. Okay, this video is starting to run long. I'm going to try to keep this brief as I can. Now, Stephen Hawking is a very interesting writer. I found this book to be very fascinating, although there were these chapters where he was talking about the whole Big Bang Theory and, like, you know, how did the universe actually start billions of years ago, supposedly. And, like, I find it kind of funny how in this book Stephen Hawking is talking about all these different scientific theories of the universe that have been developed over time, and he's like, but remember, all of these are just theories, and it's right that we, question them and think about them more, think about the logic behind them. But then when he's talking about the Big Bang Theory and, like, the whole theory of Darwinism, that the Earth is, a gazillion years old or whatever, he just takes it completely for granted. And Darwin's theories of evolution are not fact, as many people believe. It is just a theory, and a very, very flawed theory. But this was a very interesting book. I'm fascinated by astronomy, and so I did really enjoy it. It gave me a little bit of inspiration for my fantasy world. But overall, just Stephen Hawking's logic and reasoning is not very good, I'm going to have to say. It was still a very fascinating read, but just not very great. I'm giving it 6 out of 10. Okay, now we're getting into books that I really did not like. These next 3 books I didn't like basically at all. And the first one is Divergent by Veronica Roth. I've heard a ton about this book, and so when I saw it at the library, I figured I might as well read it. And I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. It was definitely a very fast-paced story. Like, it kept you reading. But there were so many holes in the plot. I didn't have any interest in the characters whatsoever, and I just couldn't see what the point of this book was. What message is it actually trying to teach? That was what really confused me. And then there's this whole thing with, like, you go through a test to see which like faction you belong to. But then after that test, the very next day, you get to decide for yourself which faction you go to. So then the whole test was just completely pointless. What was the point of doing a test to decide which faction you'll go into if you're just going to decide for yourself which faction you'll go into the very next day? It makes no sense at all. And overall, this is not a great book. I didn't enjoy it very much. I'm giving it 4 out of 10. Okay, now we get into... Here it is. New Moon, Book 2 in the Twilight Saga. The Twilight Saga is one of the best-selling book series of all time, and I don't like it. I did a review of it. You can see that review if you want my thoughts on the first book. I will say the second Twilight book is a lot more interesting than the first one. I definitely think that it's better than the first book. The story was a lot more fast-paced. Like, you can fly through all of these books with basically no effort at all, even though they're pretty big. Like, this one is over 500, it's almost 600 pages. So even though these books are really long, you can fly through them with no effort at all. But I do not like the Twilight series for so many reasons. I could talk about it for a very long time, but this video is getting long enough already. There were so many ridiculous holes in the plot of this one. I still hate all the characters, and the main character Bella seems so determined to lower her IQ score just a bit with every single book. Like that one thing that she does in this book where she just jumps off the cliff for no reason at all was so stupid. So basically, Bella jumps off a cliff for no reason at all because she's like, oh, it'd be kind of fun to jump off this cliff into the ocean. But then Edward, thinks that she's dead, and there's this whole thing. She's so stupid. Bella jumps off the cliff for completely no reason at all, only it sort of drives the plot forward. But she has no IQ, honestly. And this is still a terrible book. I mean, it was better than the first book at least, but still just not a great book. I'm giving it 2 out of 10. But I will say, if you read the Twilight Saga as a comedy, then it's actually a really great book. And then, the worst book I've read this month, and probably one of the worst books I've ever read, is the first book in the series, Twilight. It is so horrible. I'm not going to go into any detail. I already talked about it in depth in my review of it, so go see that if you want my full thoughts on it. But this is not a great book. This series has sold over 100 million copies, and yet it is so horrible. I know, it is just my opinion. If you like the series, then you're allowed to like it. I'm not judging you or anything. But just, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. 1 out of 10. No, probably not 0 out of 10, just 1 out of 10, I guess. But there you go. That is all the books that I read in this past month, ranked from best to worst. Now, a few books that I'm currently reading. The first book that I'm currently reading is Eclipse. I only just started it. I'm only on page 64. This is book 3 in the Twilight Saga. I'm continuing to read this series. Even though it's a very bad series, I'm still interested to see where this whole crazy story ends up. I want to see if Bella actually regains any IQ that she never had. And I'm still interested in seeing where the story goes. I also want to get the full picture of the series before I fully judge it for myself. And the next one is a much better book than Twilight. The Nature of Middle-earth by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm on page 190, so that's about almost halfway. Yeah, that's about halfway through. Really enjoying it so far. I am also currently reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I'm over halfway through. I will finish it this month. And I'm really enjoying this so far. But I will say, it's not the greatest. This is a very, very good story. There's no doubt about that. And I love the way that it's written. But so far, it's not as good as A Christmas Carol, which is basically the only Charles Dickens book I've read besides The Chimes and The Cricket on the Hearth. I've read a handful of his Christmas stories and a little bit of Great Expectations. Other than that, I haven't read any Charles Dickens. And this is a very enjoyable book so far. The next one is a book that I wouldn't normally read, but it's on this list of 100 books everyone should read before they die, so I figured, I might as well read it when I saw it at the library. It is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's too early on to say anything about it. I'm only on page 28. And this is a self-help book. I don't usually read self-help books. In fact, I don't think I've ever read a single self-help book in my life. But I want to read widely. I want to have a wide range of reading tastes, and I already kind of do. I like a whole handful of books. I love science fiction. I also love philosophy, and I love fantasy. I basically love any classics. Besides Oscar Wilde, I actually find him to be a very atrocious writer. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll make a video talking about why I dislike Oscar Wilde's books someday. But anyway, yeah, not much to say about it. And the last book I'm reading is Book 7 in the Wheel of Time, which is A Crown of Swords. And I've only just started it as well. And, oh! What? Oh my goodness. Okay, I completely forgot several books. I read way too many books this month. I completely forgot to talk about 2 books. Just wait a minute. Okay, I cannot believe I forgot to include these 2 books. I read books 5 and 6 in the Wheel of Time series, The Fires of Heaven and Lord of Chaos. Now, The Fires of Heaven, I enjoyed quite a lot. It was very slow-paced in the middle, but the ending really made up for it. It was an amazing and fantastic ending, and I find this to be a very good book, probably one of the best Wheel of Time books in my opinion, and I'm giving it probably 8 out of 10. But the next one I didn't enjoy as much. It is Lord of Chaos. Now, this book is really long. It's like over 1,000 pages long, and yet so little happens in it. You could summarize this entire story in just a paragraph. It is so painfully slow-paced, and I was sort of almost skimming some chapters just to get through it faster, because the characters just sit around talking about completely irrelevant things that have nothing to do with the plot for pages and pages and chapters. This book dragged so much, and it's my least favorite Wheel of Time book. And a lot of stuff did actually begin to happen near the ending. It got really good close to the ending, but not as good as The Fires of Heaven. This is probably my least favorite Wheel of Time book so far, and I'm giving it 6.5 out of 10. There were still a lot of moments that I really enjoyed about it, but the story just dragged way too much, and I'm hoping that that doesn't happen for the rest of the series. Although that I've heard some of the other books are really slow-paced, especially when you get to like books 9 and 10. But this book was just so painfully slow-paced. It felt like Robert Jordan was just trying to make the book as long as he possibly could, and he was putting quantity over quality. Kind of like Brandon Sanderson in the later Stormlight Archive books, although this is probably a lot slower paced than Stormlight Archive. Not the greatest Wheel of Time book. I'm giving it 6.5 out of 10. But there, I cannot believe I forgot to include those 2 Wheel of Time books. Now I want to talk about, and this video is getting way too long, but I want to talk about 3 books that I want to read this month. It is The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, and I also want to read The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. And also I want to start reading, I'm probably not going to finish it since it's a really long, and I've heard it's a really dense philosophical book as well. It is The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I've been wanting to read this for a long while now, and I think I'm finally going to start it this month. Of course, I'm not going to finish it since it is very big, and it's very philosophical, I've heard. I've heard so much great things about this book. Some people say that it's the greatest book of all time, and if it's the greatest book of all time, it's got to be pretty good. So I want to start reading it this month. So there. That is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. That was all the books I read in this past month, ranked from best to worst, all the books I'm currently reading, and the 3 books that I want to read this month, in addition to the books that I'm, currently reading. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and for now, farewell.